Hello, my name is Monica Hockenbrock, and I will be doing a presentation on ethics in adaptive physical education. The objective of my presentation is for you all to have a better understanding of the definition of ethics, also how ethics shape your instructional practices, both in any typical classroom and in the physical education and adaptive PE setting. I will also kind of touch on the future of ethical practices in adaptive PE and how it affects your teaching. Also, before I get started, I have attached a worksheet to do along as you watch the presentation and also the answer sheets that is attached in the email. First off, in general, I just wanted to start with some general definitions of what ethics is. When I looked and did some research, there was a plethora of different definitions and different ideas about ethics. So here I just chose a few to talk with you with, and then we'll talk more about educational ethics and then specifically adaptive PE ethics. So some of the definitions of ethics. It's a branch of philosophy that deals with morality, what is good, bad, right, and wrong. And that comes from Bond, 1996. It also refers to the ethos principle, their basis and foundation, which is a set of archetypes and models and values that form the character of each person into the state of their being. Basically, what they're saying there is different choices that you make and different beliefs that you have and how you react to situations kind of forms your core value and beliefs and how you deal with things that are right and wrong versus someone else are core values. And it creates your sense of being. And the ethics is also a set of norms and behaviors and ways of life that can be used to look at adaptive PE. So it's basically how you carry yourself in the room and the way you present yourself and how that affects everyone around you. There's history of the educational ethics. Basically what I found, I didn't spend too much time delving into this, but it was first developed in 1915 in Canada. And then it was introduced clearly in 1929 by the National Education Association, NEA. And then in 1975, we still follow today their code of teacher ethics. And now the definition of what are educational ethics. It is the core of the ethics of how education looks and the student-related attitudes. So basically how you interact with the students. And it must be based on love and respect as a teacher. When it really came down to it, all the different types of ethics, when you really think about it, it just looks at basic human rights, treating people as you want to be treated, being respectful, finding ways to engage everyone and make everyone feel important and just successful. It looks at what behaviors are right or wrong in a school setting in correlation with the student, the teacher, the student's families, school principals, and other teachers' relationships. Basically, the educational ethics kind of take everything that takes place in a school setting and weighing right and wrong, good and bad choices. But there also was some talk with the educational ethics of international values that kind of are global in respect to honesty, legally, your legal obligations, reliance on other staff members, reliance on administration, your loyalty to your values, and respect. And that comes from Wiley from 2000. So the definition of educational ethics, it's really an entire set of regulations considering the job performed by members of the profession in an ethical way and complied with by most of the members. So what Socket is saying is that as teachers, there are certain moral and ethical laws that most of us follow, that beliefs that every teacher does believe. We always want kids to be successful. We always want them to feel like they belong, and that is like a common core. Like, granted, we all deviate a little bit, but there are some common definitions of rules that teachers kind of live by. And Lukovsky from 1997 said an ethically good teacher must be honest, compassionate, wise, brave, and fair. And then from 2008, another definition I found, a moral duty, we have to act with the overall benefit and the best interest of the person. So basically, we're looking out for the best interests of our children and doing what we feel is right for them. As I stated earlier, there is an NEA policy on ethics that kind of sets the guidelines for everything else that followed. And this was from 1975. And from what I found, it's still in practice and used today. And really, a lot of it is common sense, but I just kind of thought it would be a good thing to go over. So the first one is it demonstrate access to different points of view. And what I took from this was basically be a flexible thinker. Not everything how you feel how something should look is how someone else perceives it. There's definitely different ways to see a problem and solution, and you have to be aware of that, especially with teaching. The second part they said about was protecting the students. You have to be willing to stand up for them if you've perceived something as wrong or unfair, and you have to really look out and take care of the students in your care. The third one they talked about was avoid embarrassment. This, as we've all been talked about, just carry yourself in and out of school in high standards and be a good role model for your students and school district and those around you. The next one is avoid discrimination. And this is to treat everyone with love, respect, and a caring attitude, and which I think most of us do try to do in our classroom. You want everyone to feel respected and cared for. And the last one that the NEA policy talked about was keep information confidential. As teachers, we're often given information that must be kept to ourselves due to HIPAA, due to IEPs, other information, and we have to keep in mind that that is private information and to not share it on social media, especially with some students with pictures, or post things or share with others. And then NEA, in that, their ethics, came up with their definition. So I just kind of wanted to share that with you. It says, the educator, believing in the worth and dignity of each human being, recognizes the supreme importance of the pursuit of trust, devotion to excellence, and nurturing of the democratic principles. Essential to these goals is the protection of freedom to learn and to teach, and the guarantee of equal education opportunity for all. The educator accepts the responsibility to adhere to the highest ethical standards. Again, kind of the same things. Trust, you're nurturing, you're democratic, you're a flexible thinker. You want to protect their freedom and equal education, which a lot of us do. I also found then too, besides the NEA, the Council for Exceptional Children talked about some ethical practices from 2008 that they deem important. And what they talked about was to develop the highest educational and quality of life potential for individuals with disability. Is basically we want them to be able to have a good life, and that's part of your obligation. The next is to demonstrate competency and integrity, kind of the same way. Competency, coming to work ready to go, integrity, showing your knowledge to students, being professional. The next one says engage in activities that benefit students with disabilities, making sure that your lessons engage those students, make them successful, and help with them enjoying the physical education process. Use professional judgment. If you see something, report it, change it, or you're supposed to uphold kind of the ethics as a teacher in that regard. Work within standards and policies of the profession, just looking at IEP goals, doing what's in the best interest of the child. Next is work towards advancing knowledge and skills. And I always think that's kind of what we're doing now, just kind of keep going along through your years and gaining new information and learning new techniques because they do change over time. The next is seek to uphold and improve the laws, regulations, and policies that govern special ed. We are held by law with a lot of documents, and that's your job to kind of keep up with that and make sure things are moving in the right direction. And do not condone unethical or illegal activities that violate standards. Kind of the same thing. You're a role model, and I guess we are held to different standards than other people in the community, and that's your responsibility. Now, the history of physical education ethics. There was ethic codes for physical education and teachers. They were first published in 1950. So the NEA, there was just general ethics, then there was the teaching ethics through NEA and everything, and then the physical educations came along in 1950, and that was through the American Alliance for Health, Physical Education, and Recreation, AAHRER, from their ethics committee. And this helped regulate the relationship between the teacher and the student, their responsibilities towards society, and participation in professional organizations and development. Now, I did find a few different definitions of physical education ethics. Um, and this one is from Pelevin from 1998. And it says physical education teachers are responsible for increase their quality of physical education lessons. And this includes going to in-services, continuing ed, just keeping up on the current trends in physical education. Next is arrange interprofessional competition. And here you keep colleagues, you guys work together to be to the highest standards you can be, and you work towards the best interests of your students. And the last one is protect professional ideals. In here, you need to know what values, standards you stand for, and you don't deviate from them. And then also Harrison and Blakemore from 1992 had listed some criteria for physical education teachers. Here they have a responsibility of being a model for students in society by their appearance, which we've all kind of learned through our teaching careers. Your attire is appropriate for school, you're groomed, you're clean, you look presentable. His or her healthy lifestyle, and I've noticed that's obviously, it's important for everyone, but especially the physical education teacher, to practice what you preach. Active, fit lifestyle that shows students that, you don't have to be super physical, crazy athlete, but just someone who's active and tries to do well with their lifestyle, and just someone the students can copy and look up to. And the last one, which comes up a lot, display appropriate behaviors inside and outside of school. Again, just that you are a role model. And what came up, and I know in the other presentation I saw that there is Adaptive Physical Education National Standards is one of the other presentations, but ethics was talked about in them. So I just quickly wanted to touch base on them. So this is just the objective of them. And the objective was to define and maintain a body of knowledge based upon what a practicing adaptive physical education teachers are actually doing in their jobs. Just basically kind of the standards, and in a way that like what you're held to as a physical education teacher. And also too, I think someone else is presenting on this too, being prepared for the national certifying exam. What I did here was just listed them, and I'm just going to talk about them quickly, not spend too much time. But human development, just knowledge of how people develop with special needs, how it might be different. Motor behaviors, how typical and atypical students develop. Exercise science, how to modify your classroom for the disabled students in order for them to enjoy the activity. Measurement and evaluation, how to comply with the state tests and standards and assess your students. The history and philosophy, knowing how the practice of adaptive PE has evolved and what their philosophy is. The unique attributes of the learner, just basically treat everyone like you want to treat them differently, but you want to have everyone be successful in your room and know what their attributes, what they can give, and what they might need help with. The curriculum, theory, and development, and this is how to create curriculum that best meets the needs of your students. Also assessment, just how to assess, the procedure of assessments, different types of assessments you can use. Instructional design and planning, how to create quality lessons. Teaching, and then how to carry out those lessons so students are successful. Consultation and staff development, where you work with others in the profession to further your learning. The student program evaluation, you want to look at the entire process and kind of see what adjustments can be made or what changes can be made. And what we talked about is continuing education then as well, where you remain current in the field. And then, of course, ethics is talked about in the standards, and that's why I wanted to kind of share this with you. And here you want to adhere to the highest ethical principles in providing programming and providing service to children and youth with disabilities. And then the last one there is communication, both within your profession and with families of the students you serve. So the ethics and professional practice in adaptive PE, I found some research. There wasn't a whole bunch of studies done just specifically on adaptive PE, but in adaptive PE, it's known as coherent, socially organized activity with notions of good practice within the practitioner. Basically, as in all teaching, carrying yourself to the highest standards you can. And the one article I read talked about 4 main areas of nurturing these ethical ideas. And it was dialogue, modeling, practicing, confirmation. I did want to talk a little bit about the dialogue. And this begins with ethically thinking about your subject matter in adaptive PE. A lot of times in ethics, and especially disability ethics, we look at the big picture, the big topics such as sterilization with the special needs population, genetic screening, and euthanasia. That was brought up. I couldn't really find too much more on that. But as teachers, you can't just focus on those big topics. We have to look at the issues of normalization for these students, inclusion, advocacy, and care to really service, as an ethical person, what we can do for these learning disabled students. And then modeling I thought was interesting, and I believe this is on the sheet that I gave you. It talked about different types of ethics, and the first ethic was the virtue ethic, where good people will make good decisions. Kind of what they're saying there is, what kind of person should I be? The next one is the ethics of care, and this is connected to others and emotional responses to their well-being. And they brought in the example of a nurse kind of putting your needs of someone else before your own. And it's basically looking at care and independence. And then the last one they talked about was relational ethics. And this is building relationships with others, basically saying that we can't survive in this world alone and that everyone is dependent on others and other people. And you connect with them to build trust, respect, and create a free environment where everyone feels loved and appreciated. So that was the dialogue, the nurturing the ethical. Then modeling it is modeling it to others, practicing it, and then confirmation, knowing how you feel about yourself and the feedback you get from using those ethical decisions in your daily life. And then there's also some other ethical issues that came up in adaptive physical education. There was two main ones, and one was looking at the expert, which is the teacher versus the disabled person, and then having professional knowledge versus practical knowledge. They're the two main areas that kind of came up in this one article. So the first one I wanted to talk about, there's discussion with who is the expert with disability, the impaired individual or the professional. I'm sure we come in with knowledge, we've gone to school, we've done different student teaching, we've been around a lot of disability. And then that brings to the forefront, are we ethical, are we able and worthy of this ethical reflection coming from our side? Where we also have to look at the best practices from the other side of the coin, the impaired individual. They've grown up with the disability. They have had these issues. They know what works well for them. A lot of people in the article, it said that people come in and the expert, they don't really listen to the other side. So one of the ethical issues is, how do we blend the educated professional with the disabled professional? Because a lot of times they have a lot to bring to the table. And we have to figure out ways to work together and meet their needs the best. And one example I thought that stuck out, because what we had talked about in the other class, was a peer tutor might actually exclude the impaired individuals in class settings. And that's where our ethical issues come in, where we have to look at, is this the right for this setting, or is this the right for this person? Just looking at both sides of the coin. And then there's also the ethical talk of having professional knowledge and that of practical knowledge. It's a code of conduct learned through theory and principles. So we go to school, we sit here, we study all this, we know all this information, but are we able to apply it and use it in an everyday setting to make ethical decisions? It's basically knowing the information and knowing how to use it. Next, what I found was a code of ethics for preschool to age 12 physical education teachers. And I thought this was interesting just for some of the principles, so I kind of wanted to talk about these code of ethics. So principle 1, it says the NASPE commit themselves to their own learning and they model professional practices. Just using the professionalism, exercising proper judgment, and going along and taking some professional development, just making themselves the best model of their practice. Principle 2 is NASAP professionals or educators who nurture each student's intellectual, physical, emotional, and social development. So here we respect and value the differences of each student and their own identity. We engage these students in a variety of activities and providing a range of opportunities for these students to be successful. They also talked about Principle 3, which is the NASPE professionals create, support, and maintain challenging learning environments for all. Basically, here is pushing the students not to frustration, but making them gain and move forward and challenging their students in a daily environment. And also being that role model for students and standing up and advocating for them when necessary. Principle 4, it says NASPA members advance the intellectual and ethical foundations of the learning community by collaborating with colleagues and other professionals in the interest of student learning. Here you serve as a mentor or advocate for these students in growth. You believe in their potential for all students, and you kind of go out and learn more with your colleagues and kind of do that extracurricular things that can expand your knowledge. And then principle 5, NASPE professionals collaborate with parents in the community, building trust and respecting confidentiality. Here, basically, you're doing what a lot of us do in the teaching profession, making sure you communicate with parents, build that relationship, and then seek support from outside community agencies when needed. What I did find then was there was 5 topics to help the teacher in the classroom, some interventions that you can use to kind of use your own ethics in the classroom, teach ethics to the children, which is probably could be a whole other presentation, like that was a lot of what I found was how to teach ethics to children. And as I'll get to later, that's one thing that is not as supported, even especially in high school or in any school age child, even college. Not a lot of emphasis is put on ethics because people don't want to upset the apple cart or talk about things that might be difficult. But here are some things that a teacher can do in their classroom to kind of work with some of the ethical issues and make themselves an ethical teacher to show their students. And one of those is keep in mind the educational aims. How can I educate for values? What do I want to achieve from my actions? So whatever you're presenting to your students, what are you showing them? What do you want them to learn? How do you want them to present themselves? What do you want out of this lesson? What's your objective, basically? The next is promote the dialogue, kind of what I was talking about. How can I include the students in reflections connected with their involvement in the activity and the resulting learning? Just getting students to talk, even if it might be uncomfortable. Promoting that discussion and discussion between you and them or student and student. The third one, as an ethical teacher, you want to use language that promotes closeness, trust, and understanding. How should I communicate in front of different public and different students? How you talk to teachers is not how you talk to the students or your students versus your own children. There's different ethical ways to talk and demonstrate your competency. And it says it's an adult who should adapt their language to the ability and understanding of children and young people. Next, they say take time to plan for the future and reflect on the past. You want to, how can I maintain control and carry out my educational aims? You want to look at what you're doing, kind of what we talked about, and see, is it working? Is there something that needs tweaked or is changed? Or is it going well? Or how can I make it better? And the last, you want to be responsible and proactive. How can I guide the students to assume responsible behaviors? How can I guide the students in their transformation from passive individuals to active? How can you, as an ethical teacher, show these students how they can improve themselves and be the best student they can be? What I found when I was looking for implications for the adaptive PE professionals was really all the studies talked about having ethical classes when students enter college for the PE program. I was thinking about, I don't think I had any ethical classes, but they're saying that they must include applying ethical principles that you will use when you get out into the teaching community, and it should be done pre-service and should be included from the moment students come to campus. And this would help establish common values and guidelines. And actually what I found with that was an example I thought was interesting just to share of a college who shares some pre-service code of conduct, some ethical behaviors that are expected of students in college. And I know we had rules that we had to follow and certain things we had to do, but I thought this was interesting. They said about displaying them in the education building. So here are some an example of the pre-service code of conduct, and this is from Butcher and Jensen. It says the student will demonstrate a positive attitude towards discipline, faculty, staff, and peers through word and deed, just holding yourself to a high standard. The student will demonstrate knowledge of the discipline as evidenced by successfully completing all department academic requirements, They will do what's asked of them and fulfill all those requirements. The student will present his or herself an exemplary role model for the discipline as demonstrated by pursuit of good health, physical skills, and good sportsmanship. It then went on to say, too, the student will exhibit ethical conduct in his or her personal and professional life. Again, kind of which is the underlying theme, being a good role model, making good choices. And then the student will accept his or her obligations to membership and active participation in professional organizations within the discipline. And then the last one, the student will accept his or her obligations to professional service through recruitment of other qualified individuals, become students of the discipline. I just thought that was a good example because it kind of took what we do as professional teachers and kind of took it back to our college years and to show the importance of being an ethical teacher. What I have now is a video on ethics. It's a TED video. We're going to watch part of it. I don't want to watch the whole thing, but I did think it was relevant, kind of going along with ethics in teacher education.
Get ready, 'cause here I come.
One last thing I like to introduce. Loyalty to his partner. But my point is not just that ethical issues are prevalent in our lives. Many of us will probably have already thought about that. But that, to take a step further, it's possible to develop better or worse answers to these challenges and questions, right? We can act unethically, so in ways that perhaps we regret and hopefully we learn from. And we can act ethically and in ways that promote the good. And although there's no single answer to deciding between those two options, one way to respond is to cultivate our own ethical awareness and to develop the skills needed to act ethically. Now, ideally, school, which is one of the most significant socializing experiences we have, would play a useful role in helping us to respond to ethical challenges, right? We go to school, at least in part, to prepare us for adulthood, to give us a variety of skills, academic, social, personal, that allow us to understand our world and ourselves. To this end, we get training in a variety of academic subjects and an informal curriculum of extracurricular activities, clubs, sports, and so on. But what we generally don't receive is training in ethics education. Nor in an era of maxed out curricula and standardized testing do we really even leave open space for frank and honest discussion about the ethical issues that we face in life. Now, this lack of attention to ethics has serious implications. Now, in the book Lost in Transition, The Dark Side of Emerging Adulthood, Christian Smith, who's a sociologist from the University of Notre Dame, discusses the results of thousands of survey interviews and hundreds of in-person interviews that he conducted with emerging adults, ages 13 to 23, regarding their understanding of ethics. And two things became clear from these interviews. One, that children and adolescents often do raise ethical questions in class, right, about the issues they face in the hallway, their own lives, the curriculum they're being taught. But these questions are often sidestepped and avoided in the classroom by teachers and administrators in order to try and avoid controversy. Thus, Smith notes that the moral pedagogy of most middle and high schools, or many middle and high schools, seems to be avoid, ignore, and pretend the issues will go away. But the flip side of this avoidance is the failure to engage in useful ethics education opportunities, right? To educate and have teachers and children realize that it's possible to both critically and respectfully engage in dialogue about ethical issues, and that just as we develop skills in other areas in school, we can develop skills, say reasoning and empathic skills, that can help us to develop as ethical persons. And second, and related to the first, it became clear that many of the interviewees didn't possess the tools to adequately address the ethical issues that they were facing in their life. So in discussion of issues ranging from cheating on a test to obligations to help others in need, over 60% of the interviewees discuss ethics as, and what's right or wrong, as entirely up to each individual. Now, personal beliefs, opinions, and intuitions are vitally important in motivating us to act ethically in the world and in developing our own ethical understanding. But to think of all ethics and all matters of right and wrong as completely up to each individual can be challenging when it comes to taking an ethical stand as a community, right, not just as individuals, against things that actually are ethically wrong. So here I'm thinking about assessing and taking an ethical stand against sexual assault, against terrorism, against institutional racism, and so on. So what I'm arguing here is not that personal opinions and beliefs aren't important, because they're vitally important, and it's important to respect those differences. But it's also important to think about and think deeply about certain ethical foundations, those based in basic human rights, right, or caring and compassion for others, for example, that allow us to make basic assessments of right and wrong and allow us to make moral judgments. And this sense of judgment, and there's multiple senses of the term, is not based in self-righteous castigation of another person or community. It's based in a desire to understand, discuss, and evaluate ethical beliefs, and do the sometimes hard work required to make good ethical decisions. But this distinction can be lost without any attention to ethics education. So what I'm advocating for here is not a universal set of ethical beliefs for all people, nor a map that solves all of our ethical problems, because no such map exists. What I am arguing is that it would be important for us to educate our children and adolescents to respect the many ethical beliefs and values there are in the world, to be properly humble about their place in a broader community, but also to be willing to recognize and stand up for their own ethical convictions. So what I also want to note here is that if we're worried about the controversy of introducing ethics into schools, we'll do well to recognize that children too are everyday ethicists. That is, when we're talking ethics with kids, we're not introducing something wholly new, right? If we're doing our work well, we're recognizing the ethical concerns that children already have, and we're building from those concerns to help them develop as ethical people. So in a project that I run called Philosophical Ethics in Early Childhood, or the PEACH Project, we're very happy about how that acronym turned out, right? We spend a lot of time talking ethics with 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. And we use children's literature, artwork, and games to motivate those discussions. And what I find in that work, and my colleagues find as well, is that from a young age, children possess ethical convictions and ethical ideas. They have ideas about fairness, about inclusion and exclusion, about what's right and wrong, right? So to give you an example, in a recent discussion I had with a young girl, age 4, in the class I was working with, I asked her about why she would or would not include a new child into her play group, right? It was a hypothetical girl named Christina. And she said she would include this girl in a play group because she knew it would make her feel good. And so it was the right thing for her to do. And she went on to draw a picture of what this would look like for her. Right? And not only is it just a beautiful picture, so it's just worth it for that reason, it's also clear that she's here expressing this sense of community that she's trying to build, and why she thinks it's important to include this girl into her friend group. Right? So what became clear to me from this discussion and many others is that children possess a sharp ethical awareness. Right? This is evident historically, for example, in children of the civil rights movement who participated in school desegregation in tremendously brave ways, and in many ways that adults failed to do. But it's also evident in our more common daily conversations with kids when we use children's literature, such as Frog and Toad and The Giving Tree, and children raise questions and insights about issues of fairness, honesty, loyalty, respect, and many other ethical values. Right? And one of children's greatest strengths in these conversations, that adults often lack actually, is the ability to be imaginatively present, to care about the story in a way in which they almost talk with the characters, and to care about the outcome in a vital way. And in this sense, ethics doesn't need to be a mere exercise or a separate discipline for children. It can be an outgrowth of their imagination and their daily present concerns. Right? So what I am advocating for here today is that we think about the presence of ethical concerns in our life and the possibility of ethics education as being a positive and helping us to address and think more deeply about those concerns. And hopefully redouble our efforts to build an ethical community both within and beyond our schools. Thanks very much.
What I thought with this presentation was that it presented how that oftentimes ethics in schools are often avoided, ignored, or pretended they'll go away. And ethics is a very hard topic to talk about. And what this video is saying, that there needs to be ethics education in our schooling in order for our children to grow into ethical adults. That some of it might be uncomfortable, but like I said before, I don't think in college I had any ethical instruction, and there are a lot of ethical issues, especially with our day and age, that we do need to talk about and do need to be aware of and do need to look at as we're professionals. We need to have those reasoning and empathic skills that sometimes are not there. And I like the thought that he brought up, saying that there are personal beliefs and we all have different ones, but there are certain beliefs that things are unethical, and we as community as a world need to look at those beliefs and come together with some ethical decisions. And kind of then to sum up the end here is some of the future of ethics in adaptive physical education and some topics that have been discussed or should be looked at or could be an area of interest in the future. There's a lot of theoretical investigations into disability questions that relate to disability. And the first one is the investigation of non-pathetic and idiographic research. And the non-pathetic was basically a search for universal principles or laws that is generalized across people. And basically what this is research done with large numbers of people, and it leads to generalization and predictions, like looking at a whole group of cerebral palsy individuals or a whole group of mentally challenged or intellectually disabled individuals. It's the most used method of study, but it is also one that gives generalizations about certain things that people have in common. But then on the other hand is also looking at the ethics of the idiographic research, where this is kind of where you do a case study, where you follow one person along over multiple studies and you get data from the same person. And also want to look for regularities in that research. Another investigation is that we also need to look at in the ethics of comorbidity, that we have students who are intellectually disabled, but this student could have ADHD, this student could have mental health illness. Like the comorbidity changes how the students are assessed, how they progress, and ethically we have to look at how we treat each student individually in that regard. The next one was the cluster analysis, where we look at individuals who have the same performance, they perform well in the same tasks, and we want to look at students with similar needs and develop programming. We do a big thing with the IEP is individual, but we also need to look at too, like how can what we're doing with this student benefit another student as well. And the biggest thing I found out for the future of ethics, what is morally sound and good or what is bad, is really to look at self-determination and inclusion. I think those are some of the bigger topics. And basically what self-determination is people controlling their own lives and destinies. We want our students with special needs, or any student in general, to grow up and be self-sufficient. And this is through self-determination, where people learn to be autonomous, they learn to regulate their own behaviors, they act in an empowered manner, in a self-realizing manner. These individuals, both typical and atypical or disabled, need to learn how to make decisions, solve problems, understand safe environments, set up goals to be a leader, and be more independent. And I think sometimes, I know that's a discussion with us as teachers, how are we hindering students from doing that, or are we empowering them? And I think we really need to look at that as an ethical issue. Are we doing more harm than good with some of these students when we're trying to help? Are we not fostering that independent skill? And the last one, which is always a big topic, is the inclusion. The pros, cons, goods, and bads, including all students in every activity, but also trying to make sure that they have the modifications and supports that they need in that classroom. Basically, that was my presentation on ethics. You'll see here the last 2 pages are the references and some websites. I will say that the sports guidelines for teachers on the last page, that was actually a very good resource. Kind of easy read, but gave you definitely some topics and some ideas for ethics in sports. Thank you again. That was Ethics in Adaptive Physical Education.